How many of us as churches say, woe is me, if only we had like this number of staff?
I was creative director of a team of 0 then, but now we have a full-time staff on our creative team of 5.
So you have over 250,000 followers on TikTok now and almost another 100,000 on Instagram.
That's just not my story and your story. I'm confident everyone listening and watching, it's all of our stories.
In the past 9 years, we've seen our church undergo a lot of change. We went from 90 to seeing about 1,800 at our, in our faith community this last Sunday.
All it took was one video to start this whole thing. This is the new era of social media that is so advantageous to smaller creators. There is one kind of social media content for churches that just works like a cheat code. In fact, just yesterday, I got a DM from a church that got 10,000 new followers and 3.6 million views on an Instagram reel with a post like this. And the most viral post that we've ever created at Social Sermons with more than 11 million views and 78,000 shares was also a post just like this. But before either of these posts, there was another church doing it. Before most other churches braved the new world of TikTok, there was another church doing it. And it wasn't just TikTok, because in May of this year, this church had 6,000 followers on Instagram. Today, about 3 months later, they've got 90,000. What is happening? That is what we're here to find out today as we talk with Crystal Ennis of One Church. All right, we're joined by Crystal Ennis, creative director at One Church. Crystal, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a thrill. We have been admirers of what One Church has been doing on social media for several years now. I think we mentioned One Church in a piece of content maybe as early as March 2022, which is what Alex tracked down. We like to start just by having you kind of provide some context for your church. So tell us a little bit about One Church, your role there, maybe the church's history, and what makes you all unique.
Yeah, so One Church launched in 2014 as the Church RC in Roy City, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas here in Texas. And our lead pastors, Pastor Brian and Crystal Sparks, started the church 9 years ago. We're celebrating our 9-year birthday here in a couple weeks. And in the past 9 years, we've seen our church undergo a lot of change. We've changed names from the Church RC to One Church. We have gone from being a mobile campus, setting up and tearing down in an elementary school, to having a building after 5 years of doing that. And then we've also launched a second campus in Sulphur Springs, Texas. So yeah, a lot going on and a lot has changed. We went from 90 on that launch team in 2014 to seeing about 1,800 at our, in our faith community this last Sunday. So our pastors are really passionate about these rural and suburban communities in Northeast Texas. So that's where we are, and that's the community we serve and are really glad to be a part of.
Outstanding. And what about you? How did you come to be a part of One Church and step into that role of creative director?
Yeah, so Pastor Brian, the lead pastor, he was actually my youth pastor in high school back in Sulphur Springs. So that's how I got connected with them. And that's I've served at the church for many years in different capacities. And I've kind of heard your story. It's very similar. It's just a young millennial, a little bit of pride, a lot of ambition, and told myself, I can learn Photoshop, I can learn Illustrator, I can learn Instagram, whatever the next thing was. I was always willing to learn it. So they hired me in 2016, and I've been part of, I was creative director of a team of 0 then, but now we have a full-time staff on our creative team of 5. And so yeah, that's just kind of the journey that we've been on.
Yeah, I just love hearing you say, yeah, that was my youth pastor, and one day I was like, I could help out here. Like, that's just not my story and your story. I'm confident everyone listening and watching, it's all of our stories, because there really is no, professional pipeline to get into these spaces.
That's true.
I think when I came across One Church first, it was on TikTok, and I remember marking that as something that was a little bit unusual, because I think you were one of the churches that early on embraced that platform, while so many other churches were hesitant or straight up resistant or unwilling to experiment with it. One Church was diving right into the platform. Can you maybe share a little bit about how you guys came to that decision?
Yeah, I think it was just really out of wanting to explore that new social media platform. I think with anything new, there's always the potential of, will this stick? Will it not? Will it serve us and help us meet our mission and goals? Or is it just sort of a time sucker. And what was really interesting is we spent a year on TikTok before we really saw growth. And we were originally making content specifically for TikTok. We were, taking our pastoral staff's time to do 1-minute devotionals. We were trying to use trending sounds and make funny videos. And ironically, it was something we were already doing, that weekly Sunday rewind. That's what we call our, 30 to 90 second clip from that Sunday's message. It was just posting one of those for the first time onto TikTok that really spurred that growth and got us to that first 10,000 followers. So, so at that point we were like, oh, we can stick to this. We're already doing it. We're already producing this content for Facebook and Instagram. So we'll just use that same video content on TikTok. And that's really what we've done consistently since then.
So just to be clear, the first time you published a sermon clip, it blew up?
Yeah, the first time we published a sermon clip, it got, probably it hit right at 1 million views and got us about 10,000 followers. When we had been producing all this content, native to the app, and that we thought would do well on the app, but it turned out just doing what we were already doing actually performed the best.
Do you remember roughly when this was? Was this 2019, 2020, 21?
It was 2020 because we joined TikTok in October of 2019, and our first viral video was October of 2020. After a year of trying other things, yeah.
Our exact same story. I think we joined in October 2019, and lots of native content. That's wild. The early days of TikTok, right? I remember Alex and I would make. We tried to make trending videos with trending sounds and trying to contextualize them for church. And then eventually when we just got back to what do? We help churches navigate this communication shift. We teach skills. We got to that. And that was when things really started to resonate for us as well. And I think this is worth just highlighting, because how many of us as churches say, woe is me, if only we had this number of staff, if only we had advantages that businesses do with all of their resources and money. No other industry has their senior leaders, I say this, I always want to reemphasize it, creating content specifically working for social media. They're already creating these sermons, and they so easily translate to social in ways that are outstanding. Do you, Crystal, remember what was it like kind of in the leadership team amongst the church? That first one, and you're like, okay, 1 million, after nothing for a year. One, you stuck to it, so kudos. Most churches aren't able to sustain that level of effort over time, and they never see those types of results because of that. But do you remember kind of how everyone was feeling at that time?
Yeah, we were obviously, I think our social media team is always the most excited about that stuff. Our lead pastor, Brian, he's not very active on social media. So he's like, cool, that's great. And we're like, you're viral, you're famous. And he doesn't think it's a big deal. Obviously, he loves the stories of life change, but for him, he's just encouraged by our excitement. And so our team was definitely, we were laughing because, it is that Sunday sermon clip that did it. And I think I had just watched your video on speaking to a universal pain point. I think that was the video that I created in response to that. And so that's kind of actually one thing, a testament to your content, that we took that and we rolled with it. And it was just crazy to see the impact it had. So we were excited, and it was very encouraging for us to see, this has so much potential because we do this every week. And so let's just keep rolling with this content creation plan and save everyone the time and effort of, custom creating content for TikTok. So I think it was really exciting for us. And at that time, TikTok had high virality. So we were just waiting for that moment. It was really rewarding to see that finally come through.
There's so much good stuff in there, Crystal, that I want to unpack and I want to talk about it, especially your strategy for what type of content you're posting on social and why that's working for you. I want to get there. But first, you mentioned there that your pastors are really focused on actual life change. And I just want to talk about that for a moment, because you've experienced tremendous growth on both TikTok and more recently Instagram. You mentioned your first 10,000 followers. You have over 250,000 followers on TikTok now and almost another 100,000 on Instagram. So you have this large almost invisible audience in the sense that you don't have 250,000 people coming to your physical church every Sunday. And actually, when we mentioned your church on the podcast back in 2022, that was one of the things we were talking about, was how to reach a larger audience online. So you've reached this larger audience online, but how are these videos, can you give me some examples of how this reach is actually translating into real life change?
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting trends that we've seen is that as people follow us on TikTok, anytime a video goes viral on social media, we'll actually see that translate to live watchers on YouTube that Sunday. So our production director that is managing that live stream, he always lets us know like something happened because there are a lot more people watching live. Our pastors are, though, very passionate about the local church. I think more than anything, we know that being in the room adds value the way an online service really can't. And so what is interesting is when people tell us, we were really excited. One person said, wow, I'm going to try to go to church this Sunday. They weren't even talking about our church. They were saying, I'm going to go back to my church this Sunday. And they actually followed up in another comment and said, I went back to church. It was amazing. Thank you for encouraging me. And so those are the stories that we love to hear. And then we also have a texting response that we ask people at the end of the service if they've, prayed that salvation prayer to text us decided. And that really is for people in service. But it's funny because our staff member that answers those text messages, he'll be like, someone in Massachusetts just text us decided, and they want a Bible. And so we're mailing Bibles to people in other states now because that's one of the resources we provide when people, first take that step. And so it's interesting to see some of that does translate obviously into in-person attendance, people in the area. Thankfully, social media does, also target the people in our demographic region. And so we're able to see some of that translate to in-person attendance. But a lot of that, that reach that is outside of our community, we're encouraged and inspired by hearing those stories. But I think the ultimate win would be for them to get plugged into their own community and their own local church.
Yeah, we always talk about kind of like the pinnacle of social media success for churches being what we call the crossover. And the crossover is when we have these testimony events, these encounters where people let us know, hey, there was something that happened online and it led me to now doing this thing in person. Mm-hmm. And the nature of social is that for every time we receive one of those DMs or we track down one of those texts that we realize is from, out of state or out of country even, there are dozens of others that we'll never hear about until the other side of eternity because people take action. And I don't know about you, like I'm a lurker online. Like I follow a lot of creators pretty closely. They have no idea I exist. Right. I'm not the type that comments. I don't even really like content. Me neither. And a big part of that is because my social accounts are professional accounts. And so like I have to keep, I got to keep the algorithm clean. Okay. Right. I need churches in my feed. I can't just be having, fashion and tattoo content all the time.
I'm so bad about it. I get in trouble with my wife about it. She'll be like, I posted. We're like, yeah, I saw it. She's like, but you didn't like it. Like, I helped you write the caption. Of course, I liked it.
That's true. I know. My wife gets upset at that too sometimes. Yeah. Interesting.
We're the same.
Okay. Hey, maybe that's an area of growth for us. But the point is that with 250,000 or 100,000, like you're not going to see those types of things. It's the same for our audience. Like I'll get on a call with a church, and a church will be like, Brady, I just want you to know, like. We sit down in staff meeting and like every single week it's like, oh, did you see this thing Brady said? Like, what does that mean for our church? Like, unless they tell me that, there's no way for me to ever hear. And yet it's happening for every one church that says that, it's happening in many, many more. And so I always encourage churches like to hang on to those few that they do encounter because those crossover events are happening. And every time you see one, it's probably representative of many more. You mentioned your pastor, and I wanted to kind of like clarify because it's not unusual to have, husband and wife. Typically the male is the pastor who's preaching most of the time. Maybe the woman gets like Mother's Day or, periodic preaching, but that's not maybe their skill set or what they desire to do. It seems like based on your social presence that husband and wife are equally on stage. Can you tell us about the way the pastorate at your church is kind of set up?
Yeah, so Pastor Brian and Crystal Sparks, they're our lead pastors, and they co-lead. Pastor Brian does speak a little more, but they do share the platform. Pastor Crystal did a whole series in June, for example, so she spoke several Sundays in a row. And I mean, that's always interesting when you're online because people have lots of opinions on that. So It is definitely unique. We've been told and we've heard and we get the comments. But yeah, we're thankful. I think the diversity of voices and of leadership has benefited us greatly and serves our church and our community well. But yeah, they co-pastor and co-lead the church together.
Do you see on social one, beating out the other in terms of engagement?
Well, lately it has been Pastor Crystal, but I will say she spoke a lot this summer. So yeah. And
Crystal,
unfortunately, she also attracts more haters because of the nature of being a woman speaker and preacher.
Yep.
You know what? Maybe me and Brady will start. We're going to go through some self-improvement here. We're going to start commenting more on social, and we'll start in your comments by defending Pastor Crystal.
That's right.
That's a good place for us to start.
Yeah. I said this before we got on the call. The name Crystal Sparks is probably the coolest name that I've ever encountered.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I can't come at this from this perspective. My wife got a terrible last name. My wife's maiden name was Frank, so her name was Brittany Frank, and she got Brittany Shearer, which is a travesty. And if perhaps I was a more progressive man, I could have been Brady Frank,
right?
Which is a great name. Okay, do you know how often I've gone on a call? So is it Shearer? Yeah. Is it Shearer?
Oh, no.
But if it was me, and I was a unmarried Crystal, and I came across this gentleman who was interested in me, Brian Sparks. Big points for his last name being Sparks, assuming that was his last name that she took. Like, what percentage of it was like, it could be Crystal Sparks? Now, we don't know what her maiden name was. Perhaps it was even better. Yes. But I find it hard to believe.
Yeah.
Hey, it wasn't. It was McBrayer.
See, that's tough.
Okay, yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah. You know what I find interesting about at least from my perspective of your church on social, Crystal, is having a pastoral team, a speaking team that is married and presumably has kids, affords you a real unique opportunity as a church, and you're definitely seeing this on social. I want to talk about it a bit. Is most of the content that I've seen, whether it's on TikTok or your Instagram, that goes quote unquote viral. We're talking millions of views here.
It's not quote unquote. It is actual demonstrably viral.
Yeah. Lately, most of it's been Pastor Crystal, and a lot of it is parenting content, which we know all from our own social feeds, whether it's a church account or not. Parenting content on the internet does so well. And so talk to us a bit about the nature of the parenting content at your church, speaking into your local community, but also how you've seen that content performing on social.
Yeah, so I guess I didn't realize our pastors obviously talk about practical applications of faith regularly every Sunday. And so we took one of those messages, one of those clips from a message, and it might have been an actual message on parenting. It might look like on our Instagram that they talk about parenting every single week, and they might for about 40 seconds because it's that practical application portion of the message, but they didn't speak for the full 35 minutes about parenting. It's just one of those things that is universal, right? So not everyone is a parent, but we all, regardless of our relationship with them, have parents. And so I think it speaks to that. It's a universal human experience, and with that, I think it is also a universal pain point for so many people. And so I think there's no shortage of opinions and resources on parenting. And I think people are really looking for things that align with their own personal beliefs and values to, turn to for parenting advice.
Yeah, and when it comes to a viral clip, you need something that's accessible to people of all faith backgrounds, of no faith background whatsoever. And like you said, parenting is universally accessible because it is either you having kids or you were once a kid. Before we got on this call with you, Crystal, we were talking with our team about, hey, we're interviewing, Crystal from one church. This is, they're doing this parenting content. I don't know if they're like always preaching about parenting or if they've started to realize, hey, we got to pick up this content. And they've been blowing up on Instagram recently, and we'll get to that in a moment. And, one of our staff members on here at Pro Church Tools was like, oh, that makes sense. A lot of parents, like millennials, are parents on Instagram. And I was like, yeah, but they were big on TikTok before that. And he's like, why? I was like, well, because everyone's also the son or daughter of a parent.
Yes.
And so you can see that content and be like, I wish my parents did that or didn't do that or did that differently. Maybe I will when I'm a parent. Or as a parent, you're like, ooh, maybe I should consider integrating this. I got to ask. So there's no way that you're doing 52 weeks of parenting content on the preaching calendar. And you mentioned that it's sometimes like these offshoots. Like, do you find it's these maybe like unscripted or, preaching doesn't typically have a script, but like they're not in the sermon notes necessarily. It's kind of like, oh, I'm just going to hit on this briefly before I get back to the main thrust of the message?
Yeah, I think it's always part of just that practical application of whatever they're talking about, right? And so I think it does on social media, right? You get those 40 seconds and it looks like all we talk about is parenting, but they're preaching a 35-minute message on maybe, on a variety of topics. And so with that, in their practical application portion, they're always going to discuss what is relevant to the people sitting there in our community, and that entails parenting for a majority of those people. And yeah, it's a brief moment, and it might be unscripted, but it definitely is what we know will relate to people best. So that's usually the clip we're going to take, especially lately. But they don't talk about parenting as much as it looks like they do on social media.
Well, and isn't that such great insight for everyone listening? We've been talking about these social sermon clips for a long time here at Pro Church Tools, and on this show specifically, encouraging churches to take these short form clips from your sermons, this piece of content that your pastors, your speaking team is creating every week, chop it up and post it on social. And isn't that such great insight that you don't always have to be looking for the main point of the sermon to post on social, but looking for that universal pain point, that universal touch point, the intersection between faith and culture, that moment that may or may not be scripted, that may or may not be the main point of the message, but is going to intersect with the most lives on social. And so your local community is getting fed. They're getting the whole sermon because they sat there or they watched it online. But the online community, the rest of the reachable world on TikTok, are going through all this stuff. And so reaching them just for a moment with that universal pain point, while also leading them into a next step, a conversation about Jesus. That's just such great insight and strategy for folks who are looking to find that piece to chop up in a sermon to post on social. It doesn't always have to be the main point of the sermon, but it can be something that is universally applicable to the audience that you're posting to.
Here's why I think that's super important and worth emphasizing. If you don't mind, Crystal, just a brief story time with Brady here. That it has a point, I promise. So I've recently begun doing some biking in my basement. So I got a stationary bike.
This is new?
Yeah, it's new.
Okay.
Well, it's all back. Well, no, that's a different thing.
We'll talk about that at lunch.
So I'm doing this biking in my basement just as a new way of doing cardio. Now, I go for daily walks for about 40 minutes a day. And when I walk, I listen to audiobooks. I don't want to listen to more audiobooks while I'm riding the bike. So what I began doing is watching through movies that everyone references or you're supposed to watch, but I've never seen. So one of the movies I recently watched was Training Day with Denzel Washington and Ethan Hawke. And did I get Denzel's last name wrong?
No.
Okay, sorry. I was trying to remember Ethan Hawke's last name. Did I say Denzel Jones or something silly? Okay, sorry. I always just say Denzel.
Yeah, because you're buddies.
Denzel, me and Denzel. So I'm watching Training Day, and so there's this famous moment in Training Day, the iconic line with Denzel's like, "Hey, King Kong ain't got nothing on me," and it's slightly edited for this podcast. Okay. And I was listening to a podcast reaction about this movie, and they said that was an improvised line. Mm-hmm. So the most iconic moment from what many consider to be Denzel's greatest role for which he won the Oscar was an improvised line. One of our great actors. The best moment was improvised.
Right.
And I was thinking about that, and I was like, improvisation is actually a big part of movie directing, which I actually find curious. The best actors in the world, you think that they could deliver any line and make it seem like it's organic, and yet oftentimes, the best parts are the ones that just happen off the cuff. And I think the same is true for sermons. Yeah. You have this sermon notes and this outline, and yet in the moment you decide, I'm going to mention something here right now. It's the same with the podcast. Sometimes we try to prepare stuff, and it's always when Alex and I are just going back and forth off the dome, that's when the best stuff comes out. And so I think it's not just worthwhile looking for that concept, but I would say you'll often find the best stuff when you're looking for that kind of off the dome unscripted parts. Yeah. Your thoughts, Crystal, and thank you for listening to Storytime with Brady as we interview you.
No, I enjoyed it. That's good. I think that's true. I have found that our when our pastors are the most passionate on stage, when they're getting the most excited, those are the parts that people gravitate towards the most. And usually it is an improvised point because they find that it stirred, more from within, from something that's on their mind, in their heart, than something that was planned ahead. And I think that's also when we're most vulnerable. So when it is unscripted. And I think people really connect with vulnerability and authenticity. And so I think that's what those moments carry, that a scripted moment, even no matter how well planned it is, you can't fabricate it.
And it's another reason why I think social sermons work so well on social media platforms. And again, unique advantage for churches. What do most social media posts look like on social? It's like a person talking to the camera. Some of the content that does the best on social is like, person on the street interviewing someone else. Because you feel like you're a part of an unscripted, non-staged moment. Yeah. And that's what you get with a sermon that's recorded, because you realize, I have this unique point of view where I'm a fly on the wall to a live event. And it feels more relatable. It feels more organic. And something that's accessible, because you don't feel like you're part of something that's staged, that's trying to like manipulate you or force you into one direction, which is also why we tell churches, and I'm glad you model this exceptionally well at one church, Crystal. You're not like dressing up the content. You're not adding that backing track. You're not like adding a bunch of textures and overlays and fancy transitions, because like that almost strips it of that kind of organic feeling that is what makes it so great. What you do though, that we have long been advocates for, is within maybe the first 3 or 4 seconds of the vertical video, there's a pause and there is a voiceover sharing the hook to kind of contextualize this next 30 to 60 seconds within a much, much greater talk. So I'd love to hear, I know I have my approach to this, Crystal. What is your approach to injecting these hooks? Why are you doing it? Do you ever consider not doing it? And how are you writing them?
Yeah. So I think for us, we always like to start with almost like what you would consider to be we will usually start with the strongest line, which some people will save for the end, right, as a concluding line. But we like to take that last line, the ending point, the real like punch, and put that at the beginning, because you've got to grab people within those first few seconds, or it doesn't matter what you have to say at the end of your 60-second clip. So we'll usually move the last sentence they say to the front. And then there's not always, they don't always say, here is a practical way to, guide your child lovingly and gently. So that's an opportunity. And that's something we saw being done, on TikTok. Like regularly, content creators would kind of use that format, and that's where we just were like, that works for us, we should try that. And originally we were using that format only on TikTok and keeping Facebook and Instagram the same. And at that point we might have still been doing horizontal videos, but on TikTok we would do it a little differently. And now we do it all the same, and we do it based on that TikTok model. But that was an edit that we would even I would go into the TikTok app and edit it there and use their voiceover feature. And now, you recommended a few apps, and that's what we use now after you showed us that, or, kind of showed a tutorial on that model. And so we've kind of taken that. We weren't doing it on Instagram, but I did see your content on that. And so we started taking that to our other platforms. But I think it's just kind of, in college, I remember one of my professors told us that to write a really good paper, you want to write the whole paper and then take your last paragraph and then make it your first paragraph and rewrite the whole thing. And that's kind of like the model we use when we think about it that way. We just take usually one of the last things they say, put that at the front, because that's really the point you're trying to get across.
And that's such good affirmation to hear, because we've seen that template, that social template work on TikTok as a short form video for so long. You've been riding the success of that type of content. We mentioned it earlier. You have almost 300,000 followers on TikTok. But you kind of alluded to it there for a moment. Your Instagram account 3 months ago only had about 6,000 followers. Now today, over 90,000 followers. So I was wondering, I wanted to know, can you point to a moment in time or a change in strategy that has contributed to that rapid growth over the last 3 months?
Yeah, everyone wants to know, Crystal, like, what's the secret to 1,000 new followers per day?
Yes.
I would be into that personally. Yeah. So yeah, if I'm going to write it down. So you let us know.
Yeah, of course. It's all God.
Okay. Okay, God did.
God did.
Like Jesus juke you. That
Yes.
Yeah, because there's not really a strategy that I can point to. I mean, we've been consistent. We've been doing, those videos. We have adjusted the way we're doing it for probably 6 months now. We kind of changed the way we were doing it, but it's all still that same Sunday Rewind format. And it was really just one video of Pastor Brian talking about parenting that I think it's at 18 million views now. It was truly that one video that got us tens of thousands of followers. And from there, it's kind of been exponential. I think once you have, 20, 30,000 followers, people are more easily influenced to hit that follow button, and they kind of assume, oh, you're legit. You have some sort of credibility because you have that many followers. I think at that point it really is just exponential. And we've had a few more parenting videos hit those million view marks, but I really wish there were. I mean, if there were a formula, we would have done it earlier probably, but that's, it just was one video that happened to go viral.
It was 6 months ago when you started basically publishing the same content that you were on TikTok to Instagram.
I think it was about 6 months ago. Mm-hmm.
Okay, but previously you were kind of doing like the horizontal stuff and maybe not best practices for the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's interesting. Mm-hmm. So that means that there was about 3 months where it's like, okay, we're testing out this new thing. Instagram's kind of getting a feel for this content. Mm-hmm. And then you get one dropped in and things go parabolic. Okay, there is so much good content being said that everyone needs to, first, take the beginning punchline and putting it at the beginning. Do that right away. Everyone listening needs to do that. That is like the best tip that has ever been shared on this podcast, and it wasn't from me or Alex. So write it down and start doing it. Praise God for you, Crystal. Yes. Thank you for walking in your calling. The second.
Absolutely.
All it took was one video to start this whole thing. This is the new era of social media that is so advantageous to smaller creators. Now, one church is no longer a smaller creator, but they were when they started on TikTok, and they were when they started on Instagram. 3 years ago on TikTok, they start getting massive traction. Why? Well, because TikTok was new and it was easier to gain traction then. Now, the Instagram Reels algorithm is like how TikTok was a few years ago. We've doubled in size this year on Instagram, which is embarrassing compared to what they've done, because that one video is what catapulted them, and now you've been piggybacking on the back of it. Think about your in-person services. You have Christmas, you have Easter. Ton of people come. It's exciting. The next week, almost always, back to normal. What Crystal just described is how social and online are unique in that respect. You can have a post go really big, a bunch of new followers join you from that, and you then, from there, set a new baseline. And then next week, you're not back to normal. You've set this new baseline, and you go up from there. And it becomes this whole like, well, once we're this big, it's easier for people to follow us. And if you're a smaller creator, you're like, well, how do I get that big? It's amazing. All it takes is one video. You used to be like, hey, in 10 years, maybe you'll be able to build a following like that. Now, all it takes is one video, and it doesn't have to be this big, right? Like I was speaking with a church yesterday, and they're a church of 200, and they had a video for them, and it got 2,000 views on YouTube Shorts, and normally they get 200. And then they had one that got like 8,000 views on Facebook Reels. And he's like, and then I went to my work, because I'm a bivocational pastor, and the person that I work with, I see them once a month. They came up to me and were like, are you a pastor? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, I saw you on my TikTok feed.
Wow.
Then he went to go get groceries later that week, and he did a grocery pickup service. And the person that was getting the groceries handed them to him. He's like, hey, are you a pastor? I saw you on TikTok. My wife and I are new to this area. We're looking for a church. We're going to check yours out.
That's so good.
So that's a smaller church that viral for them. It doesn't need to be, definitively viral the way that one church keeps going. Okay, so here's my question. I just wanted to summarize all those points because I don't want anyone to miss them. You have this parenting content. I want to get back to that for a moment. My question is, were Crystal and Brian, were they always talking about parenting content, or did that kind of take off and it becomes kind of this feedback loop? Because what we do see sometimes with pastors, and they've been upfront with this, like, hey, once I see kind of content that goes well, I can tell, oh, this is like the type of content that people are resonating with. And that means that our church and our unique DNA is influencing people and speaking to them in this vertical, because it's great to be known for something. It's okay to go back to the well with parenting content again and again and again because people followed you for the first time because of that content. Right. So when they see it again, they're like, great, I need more of this. And that's a good thing. So is it just this is how the DNA of the church has always been? Or was it kind of like, hey, there's this feedback loop here. Maybe this is like input from the audience. Maybe we should double down on this content.
Yeah, I think, no, they've always talked about parenting. They've always talked about the very practical applications of faith and, Christianity and your belief system. But I think the feedback loop has been more so for our creative team, like knowing which clips to take and knowing what people are receptive to and what people like to engage with. It makes sense that the most practical, universal kind of topic would be the most, engaged and the most viewed on our social media platforms. But really, I think that's been more so the feedback loop within our team of we know people will engage. Now when we hear them going to that practical application point of the message, now when we hear them mention a parenting tip or, an insight into, dealing with teenagers or anything like that, now we're more attentive to it, I think. But they've always been sort of having that conversation and talking to our community about those topics. It's just now that we kind of know, like, this is the clip to grab.
Yeah, and for everyone listening, this feedback loop is one of the reasons we always say to churches, like, be publishing. No weeks off. Stay in the trenches, because it what's amazing about social is it gives you this feedback via unemotional metrics that are incredibly valuable. We've been publishing for 10 years, and if you look now, our content is supremely better than it was 10 years ago, largely in part because we get to see on all these platforms what people are resonating with and how they are taking our content, what they're really grabbing onto. And it sometimes can be a balance, because you don't want to only create content that people like, because then you will kind of go to the lowest common denominator on social, because it will index for outrage and things like it's not about only views, it's about things that drive traction and views and engagement aligned with your mission. And that's probably one part that we skipped over, Crystal. What is your church's mission or objective for social? Before it became this big part of what the creative team is doing, it was kind of just like what all of our churches do, right? Hey, we probably should figure out social. So what was the impetus and the motivation behind it back then?
Yeah, I think once I took over our social media, I'm pretty sure it was a tip from you that said, don't use social media to point people to your church, but just use it to do what your church does. So as a church, our mission is, to create an environment for people to encounter Jesus and to take steps in their faith journey that, help them find their purpose and impact their world. And so with that, that's the same mission for our church is the mission for our social media. So that is to, create spaces for people to encounter Jesus. And, those videos go viral, but you'll see plenty of appeals to sign up for baptism, and we did a 21 days of prayer posts, and those didn't get as much engagement or as many likes, but our mission remains the same. And so while those don't get all the same engagement, we have a much smaller faith community here to serve, and that remains, our main objective. And so online, we do want to create environments for people to encounter Jesus. We can't take them through that same journey that we can when people show up in person. Our hope is that, through gaining followers, more people in our community will find us credible, will be encouraged to walk into those doors and start their journey. But so it's the same mission as our church has, just helping people encounter Jesus, helping people take next steps in their faith journey.
And I'm so glad that this is where our conversation started and where it's come back around to, talking about real life change, because we've talked a lot about how to grow a social account and lots of big numbers. But the truth of it is, like, posting these videos on TikTok and Instagram and having the success you're having is not about having 18 million people come from a video to come to one church, but it's about reaching 18 million people with the story, the message, the hope of Jesus, and empowering them to take a next step, probably locally where they are. And it sounds like you're doing a great job of that by following up with folks who reach out to you, sending them Bibles. Like, that's amazing. Surely praying with people online, moderating chat streams when they tune into your live stream the week after you've had a viral post. That's why when we talk about growing social accounts as a church, it's not about growing vain metrics or pumping up a pastor's ego, but this is about reaching the most people with what we believe is to be the best story ever told and empowering them to take a next step with Jesus wherever they are. So if they are local in Texas and they walk into your church, awesome. But if they're in Massachusetts or Dubai or Canada, empowering them also to take a next step in their faith journey with Jesus where they live. That's what this is all about. And I'm so glad, I'm so encouraged to hear that thread kind of woven through this entire conversation with you. And then there you go, you just reiterated it by saying our mission on social is the same as it is in person. That's good news to me. I'm really encouraged to hear that.
Yeah, I think part of the tension of doing online is that we can take you through that journey much more easily in person, right? We're not resourced, or neither is our leadership passionate about doing, online church and groups and outreach and all of that. And there are plenty of churches that do that really well. And so our communities are actually very small. Our main campus is in a town of less than 6,000. It's one of the fastest growing cities in Texas, but that just means it went from 1,000 to 6,000 in 5 years, And so, and then our second campus is in a city of 16,000, I guess town, not really city. But so even just within those two communities is 22,000 people. And I don't know who the other 70,000 people are, but, I hope that at least the people in our communities are getting plugged in and that we're gaining some sort of credibility in their eyes and hopefully inspiring and encouraging them to take a step in their faith journey.
And that's how all of these things work. When you start making a difference online, you are basically casting this really wide net. And only a certain number of people that are, kind of being covered by that net that you're casting are going to be even like applicable to your local church, but that's still the best way to reach people in your community. Like, you can put up a billboard and you can say, like, come to our church, but it's going to cost you a lot of money and it's going to likely be ignored. You do this on social, you cast a wide net, costs you no money to create content and publish it on social. The distribution is free, and you not only have the chance to reach people where they are, meet them with the gospel, meaning that there are eternal consequences in the best ways. Like if I told you, hey, you're going to have all these people hear the good news because of your church. And you know what? Your job is to preach the good news, and you just kind of see, it's like the parable of the seed planting. Hey, the seeds are going to be planted, and then where they go from there and how they grow, that's up to that's up to God. It's kind of the same thing here. You're preaching the good news. It's being distributed to millions of people, and the eternal consequences of that and the earthly consequences of that, they'll never be known by us. But what do we say? Like, we always say this. Oh, if only the church was leading the way with, if only the church was, well, what if I told you that there's something that you could do that would have a positive impact on your local church and in no way would take away from that, but you could also go to the ends of the earth with the best news of Jesus Christ risen and resurrected and real life for every human on earth. You can do both, and you don't have to decide which one or the other. One single thing with free distribution can do both. And I think what's holding back a lot of churches is the thought, well, how will this affect our in-person ministry? And the truth is, like I said, we hold on to those like crossover encounters when they do happen to like point to, hey, this is making a difference. But what we're doing right now is not working either. Like most churches are not reaching large groups of people, and like the mailers and the billboards and what we were doing, years ago, they were not translating to a ton of opportunity and a ton of real people being connected. But this stuff is. But let's talk about the dark side of it. Because when you reach this many people, we talked about this last week with Trey Van Camp and his welcome video frameworks. You reach this many people, and you mentioned this earlier, Crystal, they're going to get some comments. So what is the strategy of one church with comments. I've found a couple of videos with comments turned off entirely. I imagine that is like the extreme action measure that gets taken. What is the typical approach, and how do you guys navigate those murky waters?
Yeah, so we always welcome disagreements. We don't have a problem with that. What we do delete is anyone making hateful comments, insulting comments, or profane comments. That's kind of our standard. If you have a point in the message that you disagree with, it's just like our in-person community. You're free to engage in all kinds of conversations. But when it ever turns hateful or insulting or profane, we do delete those comments. And that's, if you've seen any videos with the comments turned off, I think there are two. That is because unfortunately, the insulting and profane overpowered the positive, and we would rather just curate our spaces to be positive. And if that can't be done with manpower, we just turn off the comments. And the keyboard cowboys always find you anyway. We got Google reviews for turning off our comments. And, different things like that. So they'll find you, but at least it helps somewhat. That's just, we want to create an encouraging and positive. And we also don't want to, our church community loves our church, loves our pastors, and we don't want to risk them being tempted to engage in these online debates with, these trolls from who knows where, and just losing your own peace and losing your own, we'd rather not risk it. So there are a couple times where it gets out of hand and we can't delete fast enough, but for the most part, we'll just delete anything that is insulting, profane, or hateful.
Hateful, insulting, profane. Very clear. Those three all fall under a category of commenting that I like to call vandalism. You don't have a conversation with someone that's vandalizing something. You
Right.
stop the vandalism and you clean it up. If someone wants to have a conversation, great. But if they're there to vandalize your property, which is what that is, that's not a conversation to be had. That's a very easy, hey, that clears the threshold. We are deleting that. To that end, I do want to encourage you, Crystal. I was talking with a church yesterday, and this church also had a video of north of 8 figures. So they had a 10 million plus view video. And they were saying, they're like, man, and a lot of people disagreed in the comments. And I was like, yeah, when you get a video that does really big, the reason is because there was something about it that provoked people thinking about it. It can't just be like, what's good? Chocolate. That's not going to get 10 million views. It's just likely not going to. But if you make something, it's like, and that's what the upside down kingdom, the world that we serve is what's so great, is because the way of Jesus is so countercultural that usually you can just take something straight from Christ, and it's like, okay, wait a second, that is weird, that is messed up. And so it's not being contrarian for the sake of it, it's just that the way of Jesus is so countercultural. That being said, so this church, I think they had 24,000 comments, and they were like, you know what, they were largely negative. And I said, yeah, but you know what it also had? That video had 79,000 shares. And you share content when you're like, hey, I want to endorse this message, unless you're sharing like a funny video. But even then, you're like endorsing it. So that meant if every single one of those 25,000 comments was negative, that's a 3-to-1 positive to negative ratio, which is outstanding. The thing is, what we feel isn't always real. The vocal minority, the angry minority, we feel that way more than the affirmative community and majority. Because like something negative gets told to us and we're like, that hurts a lot. And it would take 10 people saying something good for that one negative to feel like they even out. And even then, we put our head down to the pillow at night and we're like, why would someone say that? Why would someone say that? I keep having these ones, and I said I wasn't going to respond. So I'm not going to respond on Instagram. I'll just respond on the podcast where we'll talk it out in Brady Comment Therapy Hour.
I won't
These
tell
are the
anyone.
ones
Go ahead.
that I can't get over, Crystal. So people will jump on and they'll be like, you are dishonoring God with your tattoos. And I go, okay, I'm here for it. Let me know. And they're like, well, have you heard of Leviticus? And I'm like, okay, well, the Levitical verse that you're quoting is immediately after a verse that says you can't shave your face. So if you're going to be upset at my tattoos, sir, consider holding me accountable for my shaved face as well. They're like, well, what about 1 Corinthians? Your body is a temple. I was like, well, that's about sexual immorality. So if you're going to apply it to other things, maybe eating meat is bad. Maybe me getting braces was bad. Is that not defiling my God-given body? And to be fair, my teeth were not from God. I'm convinced. Oh my goodness. And every time, this is what drives me crazy. They're like, clearly you do not care about the biblical standard. And that's how it ends. And I go, but I'm asking you straight about the Bible. And it really bothers me because I'm just trying to have like, I'm trying to have a conversation based on like the same rules. Hey, this is the playground. This is the court.
We're jumping in the ring.
We're jumping in the ring. These are the standards. And they're just like, listen, they're taking a baseball bat out during a basketball game, just swing it. And I can't handle it. Yeah. And so we've all been there. Those negative things. So I lay down my head at night and I'm like, but how could they not play by the rules? There are rules. There are hermeneutical rules. I went to school for it. They exist. So I think, 3-1, like the positive does outweigh the negative, and sometimes we just aren't aware of it.
That's good. That can be encouraging for sure.
Is there anything else that you wanna add? You want people to know, Crystal, or encouragement for other churches? Things that you've seen that have worked. We've asked you a lot of questions, so we'll just kind of like leave the floor to you. Anything that you want to share with Pro Church Nation?
Sure. I think for us, celebrating every win, I think 90,000 is a really big number, but we were celebrating when our first TikTok video got 10,000 views. We were celebrating when we got an email from a couple that said they found us online, started watching our YouTube videos together. They were in a struggling marriage and they started watching weekly together. That was the one thing they could do together, and their marriage was restored, their relationship was revived, and they emailed us to say thank you. And so I think celebrating the numbers, but celebrating the individuals as well is huge because, like you said, those are the things that we can grab onto, that we won't know the full spectrum of it, but whenever we get one story, we celebrate it hard because those are the ones that matter. And even small wins, like I said, not we celebrated when we got to 250,000 on TikTok and when we got to 25K on Instagram, and just we celebrated our camera team at church, our volunteer camera operators. We shared with them the stats, like they serve in and out on Sundays. They arrive early at the service and they sit there and they man an outdated JVC camera. We don't even have like the best cameras, but they man a camera back there, and they are full-time accountants and full-time hairstylists, and they're just sitting there serving in their local house, and they have no idea the impact that them sitting there and moving a camera around has on lives of people, unless we tell them, unless we celebrate them for it. And so I think that's one of the big things that this has really helped facilitate on our team, like on staff, but also our volunteers that help make this possible. Like only 18 million people can only see this video because, Melinda or Jonathan or Erica sat behind that camera and gave time on that Sunday. And so just really expressing gratitude and celebration whenever we can, I think is huge and helps foster that excitement for, whatever number you are at, because it's always important and it's always one life matters,
That's so good.
On brand. We love to hear it. Okay, you mentioned this camera. That's great. It's something that we want to mention. Churches are always worried.
We haven't updated our camera since, we're working on it now, but we haven't updated our camera since 2016. And we're working on it as part of a bigger campus expansion, not because we are, specifically working on our online presence, but more so because we do have a satellite campus, and because, like I said, they have not been updated since, I think, 2016. So we don't have the most expensive equipment. We don't have the most glamorous equipment. We don't have paid camera operators. It's done with, volunteers and with outdated equipment, truly. So it's not the equipment that matters, you know what I mean? And it's not the person behind the camera. It's really just, I guess, just using it correctly, using it strategically and making the best of what you have.
7-year-old camera, in no way hindering the results. Every church listening needs to hear that. And I need to hear that, because we just don't publish. You know what? When I get the right camera, then I'll do it. And it probably would have been really easy for Crystal and the team to at one point be like, you know what? If we're going to publish on social, we want to make sure our content or our camera equipment is this good. Otherwise, we might not project kind of the level of excellence that we want. And they might not have ever. There's an alternate universe where they never go forward with this because they kind of, that gear is this hindrance. And where are they now because of that? Where are the lives, that couple that, reignited and repaired their marriage, and the folks that got connected to the church in person, and the countless stories that we have yet to hear, if they let gear stand in the way?
Yeah.
There was one thing I did want to ask about, Crystal, that I didn't mention. Your team. You said you started as just you, and now there's 5 full-time staff. That's one of the questions that we get all the time. Like, how do you find people? How do you train them? How do you manage them? What's that journey been like for you, going from, I know it wasn't easy for me, going from like, hey, I'm a solo creative, to now there are real people I need to manage, and there's conflict and interpersonal tension and expectations.
Yeah, I have a personal mantra that is, leadership is not a punishment, because I know I was a tough and stubborn young person to lead. And so sometimes it feels like you're getting punished for that, but I'm not. And yeah, so my team is, that's not all social media. We're responsible for worship, production, photography, videography, and volunteer teams on Sundays. As far as social media, it is myself, and then Tara, who is our media director. She does all the video editing mostly. And then Courtney, who is she does a lot of our content as well. And then we have an intern, Andy, that helps run other accounts as well. And so I think the model that I came up with is just seeing the potential in people and utilizing people to the best of their abilities. Tara, who's now full-time on staff, she started just volunteering, and she did YouTube videos for herself for fun. And so I saw her ability to edit video. I talked to her about it. We were friends before we were coworkers, and just being able to connect with her in that, and having her share, like, I want to use my talent and skills to serve the church. How can I help? And pulling her in and having her serve doing video editing before she ever, got a paycheck for it. And most of our staff, that is the case. They volunteered in their capacity long before they were ever paid to do that job. I think someone that's willing to do that work on a volunteer basis is, like someone that is going to do an excellent job once you do start cutting them a check. And so I know that that's not always everyone's ability, and you never want to abuse people for, like, overuse their skills and stuff like that. But that has been the case for everyone on staff on my team. They volunteered in their role before they ever came on staff. And I think when someone is consistent, when someone shows up early and stays late and does the hard work for free, then there's, to me, in my opinion, no one better deserving of giving that opportunity to. And I think the more you hone your skill, the more excellent of content you put out there, or whatever it is you're doing, the more you continue to improve at it, I think the more talent that you do attract. We have some really talented high school and young college students that love helping us with social media. And that's because they see, the quality of content that we put out, and they want to be a part of it. And they're really talented, and they keep us looking good. And I'm now the older person on our social media team as a millennial, and by like 8 years. And so, but I love that. I was 18, 19, wanting to utilize my passion and direct it in a way that, serves a grander purpose than building my own platform. And so there's always those young people out there. They still exist. And I think being able to identify them, hone those skills, encourage them, and equip them to do that, that's the best strategy that you can use.
It's funny that the story you're describing of all of these folks in your team, it's our story, right? Mm-hmm. Someone saw a little bit of potential, and it was like there was something there, but not too much, but enough to say, hey, let's consider building those skills up. I think sometimes churches look around, and I know this because they tell me, like, there's no one here that could help with this. Like, I mean, I was not, the number one overall pick in the draft. I promise you that, when my church put a camera in my hands. And then you fast forward, there's something so powerful about being empowered. Someone trusting you, that translates to confidence in that person. It's like, oh, if they trust me, then I must be trustworthy. Or if I'm not, I'm going to have to make myself trustworthy. They have the confidence, or they develop the confidence, and then competence begets more confidence, and it becomes its own feedback loop, and then you replicate that in other people. And I think, Crystal, that's what we absolutely need to applaud for you. It's very easy to kind of keep it to yourself. And we do see that difficulty of like, well, they're not quite as good as I was. Well, the lead pastor or the senior leader that first entrusted you certainly could have done a better job than you did at that time. But that's the way leadership needs to work. We need to raise up people below us and replicate ourselves, because that is how we end up reaching more people. We're so grateful for your time, Crystal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
One Church across all platforms?
Yes.
Excellent. So for everyone listening, feel free to check it out at I Am One Church across all of these platforms to see what they're doing. And thanks as always, listener and viewer, for your time, attention, and trust. We'll talk to you next week. Oh, I'm going to puke.
What's happening? Oh, there we go. I can breathe.
Almost died.